Okay, I got some water, so we'll start over again. We are on week 11, the second part of our fabric application lecture. We started last week with fabric application, and we covered seating and window coverings. And this week we're going to cover the next four topics on fabric application, which would be wall coverings, floor coverings, fiber-based art, and panel systems. So we'll have some fun with this lecture. So let's jump right in and get started, okay? I don't need attendance. I will say an opening prayer, and then we'll get started. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for this opportunity to learn together and for me to teach. Grateful for for Ensign College and the chance it gives students to learn and develop so many aspects of their career. We ask that we might have thy spirit with us this morning as we discuss fabric application, that I might be focused as a teacher and that my students might be receptive to the things that I have prepared for them. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. You may have been assigned to watch the video on textile industry. I'm in the process of moving that assignment to the following week. So if you have watched that, let's review that really quickly. I would have thought that the video for on the textile industry would have been a little bit more inclusive, but the one that was chosen for this course is just focuses more on what does a textile designer do. So the main aspects that were covered by the video are those that are shown in your slide. They print and design patterns that should have been reversed. They create a color palette. They develop a product line. They work on custom versus line projects. The video mentioned market week and trend researches. So it talks specifically about what does a textile designer do, which is an aspect of interior design that some of you might want to choose a more specific area that you can work in. And also you were assigned to do your final fabric notebook assignment, so hopefully you haven't had any trouble with that. Make sure that you fill in that line on residential versus commercial. There are some notes on which of them are contract fabrics listed in the front of your swatch book, but some of those are somewhat subjective. You can go ahead and write in the ones that the swatch book indicates are contract or commercial fabrics. Some of the fabrics in your swatch book could be used in both applications. Also, one more note, some of you couldn't find the information on velveteen. I don't recall what number velveteen is, but it's actually 54 inches wide. Some of you are missing that information when you do your final fabric notebook assignment. So make sure those are completely done and so that I can get those graded for you. So as I mentioned, we're doing the second half of this lecture. We already covered the first two, seating, upholstery, and window coverings. And then we'll cover the next four aspects of fabric application today. Wall coverings, floor coverings, fiber-based art, and panel systems. So let's start with wall coverings. I absolutely love wallpaper wall coverings. I use them all the time. I used them starting in the 1970s, 80s. I used them, and I've started using them again just recently. They're so much fun. It's so transformative what one can do with a room just by putting up some wallpaper, maybe on one or all of the walls. Just recently did wallpaper in 3 rooms of a new house that I'm designing out in the Rancho Mirage, Palm Springs area of California. And for the first time in a while, I actually hired a wallpaper hanger to do that for me because I had such limited time. And the house has actually very, very high ceilings, so the walls would have been a little bit tricky for me to hang the paper. But I don't know if any of you have hung wallpaper before. I hope that you get a chance to do it or that you'll at least give it a try. Maybe you'll be inspired by today's lecture and some of the things that I show you in a video that we're going to watch. Maybe you'll be inspired to try to hang wall coverings. The more of these things that you can do yourself as you are preparing to become an interior designer, the better off you'll be. Like I said, working with fabric, working with wall coverings, you need to have a sense of how those are hung. So we'll talk about that some more. So we're going to cover these aspects of wall coverings before we move on to our other three topics. History of wall coverings, the function. We'll talk about some installation methods, some concerns, the aesthetics or how it's actually going to look, the durability of different types of wall coverings, why vinyl is usually the best choice, durable woven materials, other materials, and certainly cleaning and maintenance. And then we'll look at a couple of trends from 2021, even though I'm recording this lecture in 2022 and you might be watching it at even a later date. So we've talked a little bit about the history of wall coverings in a previous class. We talked about tapestries extensively some weeks ago. So in the Middle Ages, rug-like materials were hung on walls for thermal protection and decorations. Those were those beautiful tapestries and, of course, other rug-like materials that were hung on the walls to actually make rooms of stone castles and feel a lot warmer. They gave thermal protection to rooms, certainly. This is still done. As I think I mentioned in a previous class, on a trip to Central Asia a couple of years ago, I slept in a yurt on a beach that had fabric panels on the walls for insulation and beauty. I mean, it was just wonderful to have all of that fabric on the walls. By the 16th century, European artists began painting murals on paper as a cheaper substitute for ornate tapestries. As we talked about, those tapestries took many, many years to make, and so they were very, very expensive. They were gorgeous, but they were so time-consuming. So certainly the average person couldn't have access to those tapestries then or now. So the European artisans began painting murals on paper, and so that's, as far as we know, the earliest wall coverings that were actually paper would have been in the 16th century. By the 19th century, wallpapers featuring repeated patterns made their way into interiors. And let me, we'll look at that slide in just a minute of some wall coverings that we put in Nauvoo recently. Kind of a surprise how bright and interesting those are, but these are those repeated patterns wallpapers of the 19th century. So we'll look at that in just a minute. Number 4, the application of textured fabric directly onto walls is kind of a recent thing that we are doing. Wall coverings, including paper, are usually covered with vinyl. And then vinyl today outsells all other kinds of wall coverings. As you know, today most walls are covered with paint or tile or wood, but adding fabric onto the walls or wall coverings, it gives the room certainly a soft, warmer atmosphere. And it just also relieves the monotony of a bland, bare wall, especially when there's not many interesting architectural details on the walls. Adding vinyl wall coverings especially makes them certainly more cleanable and more durable. And if you use busy patterns on your walls, they can disguise wear and tear. As I mentioned in number 5, vinyl has become a favorite choice because they're certainly more cleanable. And that's one of the reasons, of course, in number 6, vinyl outsells all other wall coverings. So let's look at a picture of some fabrics that were recently installed in Nauvoo, Illinois, as part of a remodel that I'm assisting on. We are bringing Nauvoo to make it so it's 1837. So many of the houses there are Victorian, which is a later period. So this is some wall covering that was recently put in the Hunter home on the left-hand side with these big, bright pineapples. And some people were quite surprised in Nauvoo at this wall covering, that it was so bright and so vivid. But this is actually true to the period, the 1900s, when they were using, the 19th century. This would have been a type of paper that could have been found in Nauvoo during that time period. The one on the right is in the Geen home. Geen is a not very well-known person in Nauvoo. He actually died while working on the temple. So in this parlor, we're showing his coffin right there in his parlor. But focus on the wall coverings, how bright and beautiful they are. A little bit unexpected, perhaps. So the function of wall covering. As you know, when you paint walls, they are just so subject to scuffs and marks, especially if you use a flat paint. And I've learned to seldom use a flat paint. It just cannot be clean. I prefer to use certainly a high gloss in some areas, a semi-gloss in my bathrooms, or a satin or an eggshell paint on most walls, and avoiding flat walls because they're just so hard to clean. And so wall coverings are much easier to take care of than painted walls. Number 2, vinyl wall coverings are easy to clean, but its surface can be damaged by sharp objects. I had a wallpaper that my dad hung in my childhood room that was these big, bright, late 1960s, these big, bright yellow and orange and green flowers. So this flower power wallpaper, we'll discuss that in a future slide, but they were easy to clean. And I think that's one of the reasons perhaps that my father hung it in a child's room. Number 3, fabrics can absorb and disguise any small marks. We should say fabrics and other kinds of wall coverings can disguise a small mark so that less maintenance was required, especially in high traffic areas. So the scuffs certainly kind of tend to disappear depending on the color or the texture of the fabric or the wall covering. Number 4, fabrics or wall coverings may self-heal to some degree. That means if you put a nail hole into it, once you remove that nail hole, the area just kind of fills itself in quite naturally. So, but still, if I was putting a nail in a wall covering, I would make sure to put it in a dark area where it's not going to show that much if I have to pull it out. Number 5, fabric and vinyl can cover wall flaws. Sometimes our walls are uneven, they're cracked, they're rough, and fabric and vinyl can cover those flaws on the walls quite nicely. Number 6, soft surfaces. Soft surface walls offer acoustic absorption. This might be nice in a busy office building or a conference room, in the corner of a busy office where you need just a little area that's going to be a little bit more soundproof. Those soft surface walls, fabric or wall cover, can help with that. And finally, number 7, fabric itself can actually be attached to foam or applied over batting for maximal acoustical control, or also just for an aesthetic look. I did this back it was probably in the 1980s in a condominium in Culver City, California. I took some fabric and attached it to a wall, put batting on the wall first, and then I believe I probably stapled the fabric at the edges and then put some sort of a trim over it to give myself that look of a padded fabric, which I didn't do it for acoustical control, but that is certainly one of the results. There are different ways that wall coverings can be installed. And again, this is where I'm hoping that you will give it a try yourself at some point. Direct glue is a method where a glue paste is used, and it's the simplest and least expensive method. Like I mentioned, I've hung lots of wallpaper. The way I did it in the past, often glue was already on the back of the wall covering. You would dip it in these troughs of water and lift it up and let some of that water and glue drip into the trough below, and then put it on the wall covering. So that's a method where the glue was already on it. Another method is to actually paint the glue on the back of the wall covering. And that requires laying the cut piece of wallpaper, laying it out on a big table, using a roller or brush. You go ahead and put the glue on the back of it and then put it on the wall. And then a method that I used recently and that I've tried recently is putting the glue directly on the wall. And that one I found to be the easiest. I put the glue on the wall, then I didn't have to have a great big table to lay out my wall coverings on. I could just cut them out and put them right on the glue on the wall. We'll watch a video showing this. So a couple different methods. Number 2, double-coated wall coverings keep glue from bleeding through. I've never had that problem. The wall coverings that you buy today are really, really good quality, and you don't usually have that problem with glue bleeding through from the back side to the front. Number 3, fabric wall coverings are backed with paper, making them easier to install and eventually remove. I don't know about that. I've removed some wall coverings in homes that I've bought, and it's very, very difficult to remove old wall coverings. I had some beautiful murals in the kitchen of a home that we bought in Beverly Hills, California, maybe 20 years ago. And the murals, though they're very popular right now, they're coming back in. At the time when I remodeled that house, the murals were not popular, and I had to take that off. And I actually hired a bunch of Boy Scouts that I knew from church and had them come work for days spraying that and scraping off that old wall covering. It was a lot of work, so it's not always as easy as they make it sound. Number 4, if you want your fabric that you've chosen to be prepared for wall coverings, that can be sent to textile finishers to be backed with paper for use on walls. So it's an expensive process. I've never done that, but it certainly is a possibility. Number 5, your walls need to be prepped. Very, very important step. They need to be prepped, sanded, and primed. I neglected to do this once in a townhouse in Van Nuys, California. I was working with walls that were probably a semi-gloss, and I did not prep those walls. I did not sand or prime them. I don't know what I was thinking, but I spent hours one day hanging a beautiful wall covering. I can remember it was a pastel floral, large flowers. It took me a long time to match up all the seams. Hung it on all the walls in this bathroom, in this condo. Went to bed. Next morning, went to look at my beautiful work, and all of the wall coverings were on the floor. They had fallen off, and I had to then treat the walls properly and rehang all of that paper. So it's absolutely very, very important that the walls are properly prepared before you put your wall coverings up. Wrapped wall panels, number 6, you can take fabric and tightly wrap it around a panel or a piece of wood or a fiberboard and staple it to the panel's wrong side, and you can certainly add batting or padding to that and then put up those panels on the walls, which might be an interesting way of doing it. But as I mentioned before, you certainly should try doing this yourself at least once. You need to know a little bit about this process before you can recommend it to your clients and before you're actually buying wall coverings for your clients. Here's a wallpaper that I recently wanted to see how it would look in my elevator in our home in Newport Beach. It's the same wallpaper. I may have shown it to you in the past. It's in a powder room in that home, and I had extra, so I was playing with it to see if I was going to hang it in the elevator. So I just put a long piece of it, hung it with tape and looked at it in the wall covering in the elevator. And I eventually did decide to hang it. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the completed job to show you, but it's a fun way to how easy that is. And some of my students have actually gone home and tried it after we have talked about this. It's so easy to do just one wall of a room or a small bathroom or an entire room. It's just an interesting, a pretty way to transform a room quite easily. He talked about another method that I forgot to look. A new method of wallpaper is peel and stick. I've not used peel and stick wallpaper before. My sister used it in a bathroom recently. She had a hard time matching up the design. It just wasn't a real high quality product, but that's not saying there isn't high quality peel and stick wall coverings out there. So anyway, that's just a 4th method that I had not mentioned. So installation concerns. Wall coverings need to be hung by an accomplished hanger, but when you're trying it yourself, you are the accomplished hanger. You certainly can try that. You're not going to be the hanger that's going to hang it for your clients, certainly. Most complaints come from seams showing or pattern seams not matching. You want to really work to make sure that they do, that the patterns match up. I just tried hanging a wall covering a grass cloth in Irvine, California, some years ago with my husband. It was the first time he had ever worked on a wallpaper project. I needed his help because the ceilings were quite high, and it drove him nuts that the pattern wouldn't line up exactly, but I knew that the edges would look fine once the seams were glued down and dried, and we never hung wall coverings again together after that. It was something that we did not enjoy doing together. So a few things not to do, and you can see in this image on the left, they have just put the fabric or the wall coverings in that corner in a way that they don't match up. Never do that. You want the pattern to match up perfectly everywhere in the rooms and in corners. And the image on the right shows a wall covering trim piece where they've just gone over a pipe. You would never do that, certainly. That just looks absolutely awful. So the aesthetics, or how that wall covering is going to look, it's probably the most important consideration. Is that wall covering aesthetically pleasing? It's got to be something that you or your client is absolutely going to love before you're going to take the time to purchase it and the effort to have that hung on a wall. You certainly need to, as I mentioned before, the best way of doing this is actually to hang a piece of the wall covering, if possible, in the actual location so you can see how it looks in different light, how it actually looks in the room. And number two, you certainly need to pay attention to direction and scale. All wall coverings are hung vertically, so you just have to make sure you're not hanging it upside down. I did when was it? Probably in the mid 1980s, a long time ago. I'm certainly dating myself today. I hung some wall coverings in, I was doing a remodel of a beach house with my father-in-law, and I hung the wall coverings myself in 2 or 3 of the rooms. And I used a small blue floral in one of the bedrooms and hung it on all the walls. And it wasn't until some years later, one of my daughters was lying in that bedroom and said, "Mom, do you know the wall covering or the wallpaper on one entire wall is upside down?" It was a small enough print that I hadn't noticed, but one wall, the paper was completely upside down, and I didn't notice it for years. So you need to pay attention to direction. The scale must be right. The scale is particularly important. You have to look at the relationship of the motifs in the wallpaper to the size of the room and the furnishings and everything else that's going to go on in that. Wall coverings are perhaps the most difficult aspect of the room to work with, mainly because they're large. They're going to cover entire walls, so you need to make sure it's right. And hanging wall coverings takes a little bit of a practice, but it really isn't that hard, I don't think. So I recommend that you give it a try at some point. It just is magical what you can do to a room. So the durability of wall coverings. Generally, wall coverings are not subject to abrasion in the same way that furniture is. We're not sitting on our walls. We're not rubbing up against the walls too much. As I mentioned earlier, my dad hung that flower power wallpaper in my childhood bedroom. These orange, yellow, and green flowers on 3 walls, and then he put a coordinating stripe on the 4th wall. And my sister and I absolutely love it. That wall covering lasted all the way through the 1970s and the 1980s when I was living in that home. And then my brother eventually bought the house and removed the wallpaper and painted over the orange doors after 30 plus years. That vinyl wall covering had stayed on the wall for close to probably 35 years, and it had not faded. It was not damaged. I mean, they had very little abrasion on it, and it came off quite nicely. I wish that we had kept a picture of that so I could have shown you how well that vinyl wall covering held up over all those years. Wall coverings are subject to, number 2 on our slide, wall coverings are subject to fading and must be tested for light fastness, but the one that I just mentioned to you, it had not faded at all, even though that room had 2 of the 4 walls had large windows on them. That vinyl had not faded. It was really quite amazing how it held up. So vinyl is certainly the most widely used wall covering. It's great for kitchens, bathrooms, and of course elevators. As you saw that I put it in an elevator in a home. The positives, it can certainly be wet cleaned. It's relatively inexpensive. It's easy to install. Number 3, the negatives on vinyl. The seams show more on vinyl than I think on other wall covering materials. The seams did show in my flower power bedroom, certainly. And another negative is that the vinyl wall coverings cannot be repaired if the surface is gouged. Those marks are going to show, and some don't like the shiny surface of a vinyl wall covering. But number 4, vinyl is generally much easier to maintain than paint. And think of how many times that childhood bedroom of mine would have had to be painted over the years, whereas that vinyl wall covering just had to be washed from time to time, and it just held up so beautifully. Of course, now vinyl is generally the first choice for healthcare interiors, and I think you can answer that the why to this question quite easily now. It's because it's going to last well, but mainly it's easy to clean and fairly easy to install. Vinyl wall coverings are, and in a healthcare application, you certainly need something that's going to be very, very easy to clean. Durable woven materials. Wall coverings certainly need to be durable. They're often made out of polypropylene, which is also called olefin, which is first introduced in the 1980s. Properties of wall coverings: they're light fast, they're cleanable, they have dimensional stability, which is important. Once you get that wall covering wet with glue, you want it to be stable so that you can match up the pattern on it, so that's very important. You need to pay attention to the overall appearance, and these durable woven wall coverings, especially these vinyls, have attractive pricing. And in large commercial areas, that's very, very important because you might be purchasing many, many rolls of wallpaper for a large commercial application. So it needs to be somewhat affordable. And that's where you're going to probably go with your vinyl wall coverings for your commercial applications. Wall coverings, other materials. What else can you put on the wall? Well, I'm certainly going to try some of these. I haven't used all of these, but number one, natural fibers are also popular for woven fabric wall coverings. You could try linen, silk, various fiber blends. I've not yet tried some of these more exotic fabrics on walls yet. It would be expensive to have them laminated, put a backing put on it to have them prepared to be hung on walls. As I mentioned before, I did that with cotton in the 1980s, but I haven't tried it with linen or silk yet, but I certainly will at some point. Number two, almost any fiber will perform well because the material cannot stretch once it's laminated. So once you have that backing put on it, it's going to give it the dimensional stability. And wouldn't it look fabulous? It would just be fabulous to have some linen or silk fabric on the walls. Number three, natural fibers have limited applications just because they're generally more expensive than synthetics. So that's going to be the drawback of those natural fibers to be used on your walls. All right, so just like anything else that you're putting in an interior of some sort, it has to be cleaned and maintained. Wall covering should be vacuumed regularly. Vinyl can be wet cleaned. Olefin can be washed with strong solvents. That's nice to know, but certainly blended types of fibers might need special cleaning. But just like any of your floors, your curtains, and your seating, upholstery, these things need to be cleaned regularly. Sometimes you're going to have yarn, different types of yarn on a wall covering, and that would be something like that would be probably hard to clean too aggressively. So you kind of have to pay attention to what the wall covering is made out of before you start cleaning it. But in a residential, you know, I've always said that once the windows get dirty in a house, it's time to sell the house. And perhaps the same thing is true. When it's time to wash all those wall coverings or vacuum them, maybe I would just sell the house. Just kidding. But you do need to pay attention to cleaning and maintenance. All right, let's look at a couple of trends in wall coverings from 2021. And some of these may or may not still be current and contemporary for today. But as I mentioned earlier, murals are making a comeback. As you look through Architectural Digest and some of your other interior design publications and magazines, you see a lot of wall coverings that are murals. And I can see myself using those in residential applications a lot in coming years. I quite like them. I mentioned a house that we bought in Beverly Hills in circa 1990 where it had this kitchen mural on it that I took down because it was a very, very dated look at the time. But I do look forward to using murals. So I'm going to show you maybe 10 trends, and you can decide whether or not you like them. I wish I could see your thumbs up or your thumbs down like I do in my Zoom classes, but so just say out loud whether or not you like this idea of a mural in this very, very sunny, kind of a sunroom. Here's a very, very intense wall covering, another mural. You can either like or dislike it in this kind of kimono-esque looking room. In this wall covering is probably a vinyl. You can see the seams, which is a bit of a problem for me. I don't like seeing seams in wall coverings, but I do like the intense kind of look of this very, very dramatic room. I'm not sure what's hanging on the wall on the left side, but a lot of really interesting textiles there. I wish we could see that a little bit better, see what all those textiles are on the left side. Here's another quite a dramatic room, very a kind of a darker, maybe a sexy room created with this wall covering, and of course with the headboard and all of the textiles that are put in there. Again, the seams are very, very visible on this mural, which I don't like seeing the seams. That's a distraction to me. But you can decide whether or not you like this look that was created not only with this wall covering, but with all of the textiles that were used here. This is a bathroom application made to look like tile, but it's actually wallpaper. This is called trompe-l'oeil, which is a French term meaning trick of the eye, meaning it's made to look like something that it's not. In this case, the wallpaper is made to look like tile. My preference for that wall would have been just to do it in tile instead of using a wall covering that looks like tile. But, you know, that's personal preference. So this is an example of trompe-l'oeil, which is a type of a look. Here we have a very, very textured wall covering. You just kind of want to touch this to see how it feels. Again, I don't, you know, the seam on near the left side is not done well. So that's a very, very obvious mistake. They did not match up that pattern correctly in hanging that wall covering. The seam, I think, is a bit of a distraction, though I do like the texture of that wall covering. So you may or may not like that particular look. Here is a very, very busy floral, a botanical, kind of tropical, and it's more of a look of a mural. These trends tend to be very, very eclectic. I tend to always like botanicals and florals, but I know it's not everybody's taste. So you can decide whether or not you like that particular look in a wall covering. Here are some kind of tropics and wilderness looking wall coverings where the exotic is kind of moving indoors. As I'm recording this lecture, we've all had a huge lack of travel in the last couple of years, and so sometimes we just want to bring that look into our homes of the exotic places that we have not been able to go to. You want to kind of bring your holidays and your travel that you haven't been able to do, bring them into your home, perhaps put them on your walls. The paper on the left has that coordinating fabric, very, very exotic looking. On the left, you would have to use, you know, not too much else in the room that has patterns on it when you use that busy of a wall covering. On the right, you've got a kind of a botanical gray in the background, which I'm not real fond of. I love botanical prints, but I don't like it in that gray wall coverings in particular. Not my favorite, mixing the green with the gray, but, you know, like I said, it's aesthetics are very, very personal. Here's a very, very abstract design with some brilliant colors. This one is made to look like natural materials. It's a wall covering, but it's made to look like either a wicker or a cane look. I wouldn't really recommend that in a residential application, but I could see that in a commercial application perhaps. This is a pattern that has been printed on cork and then used as a wall covering, and as we mentioned before, that would be acoustically quite absorbent and would make a room seem quieter and feel a little bit warmer because of this cork material on the walls. Here is a very, very chintzy kind of a floral look, very much of a grandmotherly look. And actually, these have gotten a little bit popular. These grandma-style patterns are all the rage, we're told, with cool, young fans of interiors. So you may like that, you may not. They've put a very, very Victorian lamp with that. But florals over the years tend to be the most popular and really never go out of style. The florals don't. Here is one that seems to be perhaps influenced by a tapestry influenced design, using botanicals as well. You may or may not like that. A very, very dramatic look for a particular room. But as I've mentioned, I just absolutely love wall coverings, and you can do some very, very interesting things with them. If you've ever experimented with wall coverings, or if you plan to give it a try in the coming weeks, send me an email. Show me some of the things that you've done with wall coverings and let me know how it goes. Okay? All right, so let's move on now to floor coverings. Last week we talked about seating and window coverings. We've covered wall coverings this morning. Now we'll talk about floor coverings, which are really the other big area of a room. So they're big. Wall coverings and floor coverings are big considerations because they're such large areas to work with. So we'll start with types of flooring. We'll talk about the function of flooring. Obviously, that's not too hard to figure out. Construction, content, and backing. Static generation. Does the flooring create static electricity? We'll talk about installation and maintenance and sustainability. Of floor coverings. So let's start with this image that shows us quite a busy but a very beautiful rug that is being used as a floor covering. It's probably almost a wall-to-wall size rug on the floor of this room. And you can see that the rug really defines the space, defines the whole look, and sets the tone for this entire room based upon this beautiful rug. So you kind of have to ask, I want you to ask yourself, what is the tone that has been set for this room, and how does this rug actually define the space? What would you say the tone is here? It's a little bit on the formal side, but quite comfortable, quite warm, quite inviting. The way they've got the walls painted a very, very warm red or orange, with the color being taken from the colors on the rug. So the rug definitely defines the space, and the whole room appears to be built around this pattern on this very, very nice rug. Carpets. Many rooms and homes are carpeted. I personally don't like carpet. I have very, very little carpet in any of our homes. I've remodeled so many homes over the years that anytime you pull up old carpeting and see how much debris and dirt and dust and grime is collected underneath your carpets, it's just kind of turned me off to carpet. We can vacuum carpets, we can steam clean, we can dry clean them, but still a lot of gunk kind of ends up underneath carpet, so I tend not to use them too much. But they're certainly the most comfortable thing in some rooms. Like in bedrooms, we often like to step on carpeting. It's produced in bolts, but is made so that it can be seamed and matched and cover very large areas. Bolts of carpet are generally 12 feet wide and 90 to 100 feet long. So in most of the rooms in our homes, we don't have to have seams. In larger commercial applications, the carpet is going to have seams in it, but at home, we generally don't have to. There are all kinds of rugs that one can put on your floors. Unlike carpets, rugs come in specific sizes. Rug patterns are often designed with a central motif or a central figure and borders that are contained within the edges. There's just a huge variety of rugs that can be chosen for your homes. I've shown you in the past some rugs that I bought in Central Asia and other rugs. I have other rugs that I've bought in Egypt, in Morocco. I just love collecting really exotic rugs and using them in homes. This is a flat woven striped rug, and you can actually see that the fill yarns is the colorful stripe, but the warp yarn is visible and creates a pattern of a subtle weave. You can actually see some of those warp or vertical threads that become part of the pattern. It's a little bit hard to see on that one. These are some kilims. They're flat woven rugs in which the fill yarns completely cover the warp yarns, so you don't have any exposed yarns as in the previous example. And you can see a closer detail of the weaving on that rug image on the right. Just like I said, a huge variety of rugs. Braided rugs do not have a pile. They're made from strips of cloth that have been braided together, and then the braided strips are sewn side to side in an oval format usually. They're not used so much today. They were used quite a bit in the 1960s, 1970s. in early American reproduction homes. We had those in my in-laws had a beach house that had many of these rugs in kind of an early American room, and my sons used to like to take their Matchbox cars and and follow the trails on the braided rag rugs around the room. But I've been collecting them recently, the older ones, for use in historic homes. In fact, I just installed one in a room at the Beehive House in Salt Lake City. So the braided rag rugs have been around for a lot of years and certainly aren't popular in homes right now, but have been used, and they'll certainly be used again. Many of your grandmothers, great-grandmothers may have saved their old rags. My grandmother certainly did and made her own rag rugs into braided rugs, and those would be called braided rag rugs. Rugs can be made of any fibers, including these vinyl coated cord that was used to make these mats. And that's not something you would probably put in your living room or a formal room in your house, but where would one maybe use a vinyl rug? And I think the obvious answer would be outdoors, perhaps in a children's bedroom, something that had to be, could be taken outside and hosed down, or just used outside. That's where you would possibly use a vinyl rug. This shows a couple of hand-hooked rugs. You may have tried that. I had some kits that I used to let my kids play with where they would make hand-hooked rugs out of textiles. It was a lot of fun using a hook on a canvas. And the one on the left shows more of a coarse textured hand-hooked rug. And then the one on the right would be a fine textured hand-hooked rug. So very, very different final appearances on those two, something that you could make yourself and something that you probably couldn't do yourself on the right. This is a fairly new wool rug that I installed in our living room in Newport Beach just a couple of months ago. You can see that the fringe on that long rug is a warp. The warp yarns were just kind of left and tied to create the fringe. On this one, when I purchased it, it came in the mail, and the fringe varied from 4 to 7 inches. I found it very strange that it had not been trimmed, so I got out a ruler, of course, and trimmed it now to an even 4 inches all the way around. I just had to trim all of those warp yarns on that rug. So an interesting design in a wool rug. I had actually purchased a smaller version of this rug for our library in Salt Lake City. I found it at R.C. Willey. It was just a magnolia design, so it was easy to find it online and have a larger version of this magnolia rug sent to Newport Beach. Just a great wool rug I recently installed. So continuing on, just for a few more minutes on floor coverings. Their function mainly and their aesthetics. So acoustical absorption, as we mentioned with using textiles on walls, they kind of absorb some of the sound in a room. So of course the main function of rugs are going to be the aesthetics, how they make the room look, but the secondary function would be acoustical absorption. I've just repeated that. Number 2, I just mentioned, most important consideration is the aesthetics, the way that is going to look in the room. Number 3, after the walls, which we just finished talking about, the floors are certainly the largest surface in a room. So you really want to know what that rug is going to look like. A lot of our rugs today we buy online, but they're a little bit harder to return. Even though, as it says here in number 4, rugs are generally returnable so they can be viewed in the intended environment. I often bring home rugs from department stores, from a place like a Home Goods, and so I can audition them in a room to see how they look, and then if I don't like them, they can return them. The only problem with this is that rugs are so often very, very heavy, so that makes them a little bit tedious to return. And then if you purchase them online, they're a little bit harder to return, but they certainly can be returned because they need to be viewed in the intended environment. Also, number 4, carpets can have patterns that are hard to see in the small samples. Well, I guess this is number 5 on your slide. Carpets must be selected from a small sample piece, and it's hard to see what that's going to look like if the manufacturer's just giving you a 4-inch square. Sometimes they'll give you a 12-inch square to see in your room. So that's a little bit tricky to audition your carpets for rooms from just a small sample piece. Number 6, the scale of the carpet pattern must be considered. Often, most of our carpets that we use in homes don't have a pattern to it. Sometimes they have a cut design on them, but you need to make sure that the scale is going to be appropriate for the room. In general, solid colors are preferable for residential applications, and small scale texture and pattern are used in contract floor surfaces. And we'll look at an example of this in the next slide. In an office building, a pattern like this is completely appropriate, but it might not be something that you're going to want to have in your house. The scale of this carpet pattern kind of activates an otherwise austere office space. The furniture is very, very plain. The chair has a little bit of a texture to it, but not enough that it's going to detract from the floor. So the floor kind of tends to be the star of the show in this office environment. And you can see this carpet in this little cubicle is also a print, and but it's still very, very subtle and doesn't work against what's on the walls there. So small scale texture and pattern are popular for commercial installations because they help to disguise wear and tear better than a solid wood would, like we would tend to use in our home. In commercial interiors, sometimes we'll use large-scale pattern carpets in areas such as reception areas or dining areas where the spaces are larger and more expansive, and a more dramatic flooring is an accepted aesthetic. Also in hotel hallways, you'll see these very, very busy patterns that can kind of have stripes along the edges perhaps, and then something busier in the center. But it's not something we would generally use. A wall-to-wall carpeting that looks like this is not something that we would generally use in a home. It's more appropriate for very, very larger rooms in commercial interiors. As I mentioned earlier, the carpet often has to have seams in it in our homes. The rooms in our homes are generally of a size that we don't have to have seams in our carpets. But in larger commercial applications, you do need to have seams. And this slide shows that where they have taken advantage of those seams areas by splicing together different carpeting to give it kind of a more contemporary look, and splicing it together and to define different space within this office setting. The blocks of the bold color kind of distract the viewer from what would be kind of a monotonous linear pattern in this long hallway. They've divided it up by cutting some other carpets on the diagonal to make it look a little bit more interesting. So something that could be done nicely in commercial application. So continuing on with flooring, floor coverings, construction, content, and backing. Wool over time has proven itself to be the most ideal floor covering. It repels water, it's resilient, it's easy to clean, it accepts dye quite beautifully. When you move furniture around in a carpeted room, if the furniture has been sitting there for a long time, especially if it's a heavy bed, you're going to have kind of a divot in the carpet where that furniture was. But I'm telling you, if that's a wool carpeting, after a couple of weeks, that carpet is just going to spring back and you're not even going to be able to see where that divot was from the furniture. Because one of the properties of wool is that it kind of bounces back in a nice way. Number 2 on your slide, cotton has very, very limited durability, though is very, very soft for us to walk on. It accepts moisture readily, but it tends to stain. So where would you want to put some cotton rugs? Well, obviously, cotton is going to be ideal for bathroom rugs. It can be machine washed very, very often. It's just going to be very, very comfortable to walk on in bathrooms and areas like that. So you wouldn't put it in a high traffic area, certainly, but cotton is a great floor covering for a bathroom. Let's talk just a moment about backing on your rugs. Backing is integral to the performance of the material itself. Many machine-made rugs are sold with a latex backing that adds stability. And certainly your carpet needs to have a backing on it as well. Some of you have moved into older homes, and we all have seen this. We've all seen carpeting that was not installed properly or was not backed properly, and it tends to have ripples in it in time. So like I said, it's either a poor quality carpet or it wasn't installed properly. It wasn't stretched enough out to the edges. If it's a good quality carpet, it can be re-stretched and reinstalled, reattached to the tacking along the edges. But if you've got those poor fitting carpet in your room, you're probably better off just to get rid of it and start over with something new and of better quality that has a better backing on it. This image just reminds us that the sheep in this room reminds us that wool is the ideal fiber for floor coverings. It certainly is my favorite, though a lot of synthetics are used. If I am going to use a rug in a room, or if I'm going to use a carpet, which I rarely do, it is going to be wool. And our next slide shows us, just reminds us that it accepts dye very, very beautifully. And this slide just shows us that wool can be dyed just a multitude of colors, which makes it ideal for carpeting. Let's talk a little bit about the cut and the different pile that carpeting and rugs can come in. A loop carpet shown on the left gives an all-over multicolor effect. We used to call this Berber carpeting in the 1980s, and I used it extensively in a home in Pacific Palisades many years ago. The second image on this slide shows areas of cut pile contrasted with loop. So it has kind of a combination of the cut pile and the loop. So which of these two do you think is going to be more durable, a cut pile or a loop? So you can see both of those in the center, and the slide on the right shows your loop. So looped carpet is what we tend to see in commercial applications. Think of the carpet that you will see in your church. It's very, very different than the pile carpet that you see in your homes, because the loop pile carpet is more durable, more popular for commercial applications. But the cut pile is certainly considered more lush and comfortable, and so that's what we tend to use in our residential applications. And a lot of that just depends on your personal preference as well for your home. But a commercial application, you rarely see a cut pile. You generally see a loop pile. Okay, so this shows us gives us a little bit of a better view of what a cut pile looks like. Especially if you look at the images in the center here, you can see what that pile looks like in different ways that is cut, giving us different looks. Pitch and row just refers to the number of tufts or thread per unit of measurement. It's similar to what we learned about in the past with our sheets and the thread count. Pitch and row shows us the number of tufts or threads per unit of measurement. And then this is, to contrast with that pile, this shows us more of a tufted or the looped carpet. This slide also mentions that the backing is so important to the life of the carpet because it certainly gives it stability. Solution dye, the nylon dyed by the fiber company is usually done before it's extruded into yarn. Olefin can only be solution dyed, less expensive, but mainly I want you to understand the difference between the cut or the looped pile yarns, or the combination of both, and which is going to be better for a residential application and which one we generally see for a commercial application. Again, an image of a bedroom here, which is generally going to have a pile carpet. It's certainly popular for pile carpets because it's so comfortable on your feet. But I tell you, anytime I buy a home or work on a home that has wall-to-wall carpeting, generally the first thing I do is remove it and replace it like with a hardwood floor or something else like that, and area rugs, which is so much easier to care for because I pulled out so many carpets that have collected a huge amount of debris beneath them. So you choose. Excuse me. This is another rug treatment, a sisal rug, which is made out of natural fibers. It has bound edges on it. So you have these natural materials woven into a rug, a very, very casual look. But in this room, it's a little bit more of a traditional look. It's put over a hardwood floor, mixing it with traditional furniture, and a very, very lovely look. And sometimes we'll use rugs, a sisal rug and a more of a fabric rug on top of it, or vice versa. Sometimes today they're combining the two looks, or the two types of floorings. This shows a rug made out of rattan, a plant fiber similar to sisal, and it's often woven into rugs and mats. And as I mentioned, sometimes the other rugs are placed over woven rugs. I'm not sure that I like the look. My daughter did it recently in her home, where she stacked two rugs together. And I know it's a popular trend today, but it's not one that I'm particularly fond of. Static electricity generation was a bigger consideration in the past than it is today. Carpets are now made with anti-static filament that does not affect their appearance, so that's an after treatment to a carpet that makes it so it doesn't generate static electricity. But I'm telling you, when I was a child, that was something my brothers used to tease us with. They would walk through a carpeted room, rubbing their feet across the floor, and then come and touch you and pass that static electricity onto you and give you quite a shock. It's not as big of a problem right now. The computers today are increasingly well grounded, and carpets, a tendency to increase static electricity in a room is no longer a significant problem like it used to be in the past. So lucky you, lucky you. Installation and maintenance of floor coverings. The main problem with carpets arises with improper installation. Like we mentioned before, you've all seen that room with the carpeting that has waves in it where it's come loose, probably installed incorrectly, or perhaps an inferior product that didn't have the proper backing on it that gives it that dimensional stability. Appropriate backing is critical, as I just mentioned. Carpet should be regularly maintained with regular vacuuming and periodic professional cleaning, but still, when you pull that carpet out after some years, you're going to see that a lot of the dirt has made its way down under the carpet and onto the pad beneath it. In the case of handmade, number 4 on your slide, handmade and antique rugs, patina develops from light exposure that is considered part of its inherent beauty. And you've all seen this in older rugs. It's a little bit hard to see on this one. This one doesn't really show that beautiful patina, but a lot of our older rugs have changed color subtly due to light exposure, and that's considered quite an attractive look today. Many of the reproduction rugs that you buy, and I know that some that another daughter of mine recently put into her home, are reproduction of antique rugs, and they're made to look quite faded with subtle changes kind of built into it to mimic that look of an antique rug. All right, so this slide again is showing different wall-to-wall carpeting in residential and commercial applications. Mentions a static generation, which is not a huge problem today. Mentions flame retardants. All carpets must pass flame retardants tests because you just can't have a large surface area that's going to be subject to burning. It's very, very important because of the size of the area that's covered by large carpetings certainly have to be fire retardant. Installation and maintenance, so we've already covered that. The vast majority of problems that arise with carpets are improper installation. The backing has to be done well, and we need to regularly maintain those. I think this is probably about the end of our discussion on floorings. Would be sustainability. Carpet is used in huge quantities, perhaps it's under greater scrutiny for its environmental impact than almost any other interior fabric because it's so large. And today, a lot of this carpeting can be recycled into backing material. So it's good to know that there is a way that carpets can be recycled because they're such a big chunk of fiber. It's nice that can be recycled into backing material. Okay, so we're going to move into fiber-based art and discuss that for a few minutes, and then our final category for today's lecture will be panel systems. So fiber-based art. We'll look at durability, cleaning, and maintenance, and then a few trends from 2021 that are, some of them are wonderful and some of them are pretty awful. So fiber-based art is any kind of a fiber-based textile that you're going to put on a wall to use as art. So let's talk about durability, cleaning, and maintenance. So fiber art, like any other textiles, needs regular cleaning. And sometimes these artistic pieces that we put on our wall are going to require special kinds of cleaning. And you almost have to talk directly to the artist that's created that fiber art to see how that should best be cleaned. Fiber art should certainly be kept away from constant light. It's so subject to fading. Many museums that have a lot of fiber-based art, such as quilts on the walls, they use lights that are very, very dim, and they're only turned on when viewers come into the room, and the rest of the time that gallery is in complete darkness. Artists and galleries should provide care instructions when a piece of textile art is sold, and it's going to ensure your satisfaction with that piece in the end if you know how to properly care for it. So let's look at several examples of fiber-based art from traditional to contemporary. This is an installation done by Megan Bogdan-Shemek is her name. And this is a fiber art installation that she has done. Do you like or dislike this one? Certainly not something that you would put in a residence. I don't know, maybe in a torture chamber of some sort. I don't know, but a very, very contemporary look for some sort of commercial application. These are some wall hangings done by Tony Brogan. It's hard to see the detail on the one on the right, but it's similar to the one on the left, which you can see. Wall coverings that are made out of fibers. Cleaning those would be a little bit tricky. You'd want to check with the designer and see what she would recommend, how those would be cleaned. And you can decide whether or not you like those two fiber-based art wall coverings. Here are a couple more by Caroline Auchentre. Auchentre is her name. Very, very large pieces. We don't have any furniture pieces that we have in this room, so you can see the scale. But these are very, very large wall coverings. The one on the left, just with a variety of cut pile, it looks like in different colors. The one on the right kind of looks a little bit Picasso-esque with that funny eye on the right and all the hair like fibers trailing down to the floor. So you can decide whether or not you like these two images of fiber-based art. Here is a very, very traditional tapestry, absolutely gorgeous, a wall hanging in a living room, very, very traditional, very, very expensive. I have a girlfriend that lives in Brentwood, California that has several of these that were installed in her home by her interior designer who collects wonderful things from all over Europe. So she has some beautiful original tapestries. I absolutely love them. This one actually looks like it might even be a painting that replicates an original tapestry, but it was included in a list of fiber-based art, so it might actually be a tapestry. It's hard to tell. So you can decide whether or not you like that very, very traditional look in a room. So another way that fiber-based art can be used. Today we hang quilts on our walls. This is done by Anna T. Rolap. That's me. It's one that I have did some years ago and is hanging now in a bedroom in our Salt Lake City condo. So another type of fiber-based art used on walls. So you better say you like it since it's one that I made. Another example, this is called Hands. It's machine applique sculpture made by Margaret Cusack. These absolutely huge panels, there are 12 of them, and looking at the chairs and the plan at the bottom of this image, you can see how large those are. So it's a fabric application, a fiber-based art used in a commercial application. And you can decide whether or not you like those images showing what hands can do. And done in a very, very large scale. This is not a good image, but this is a screen print of silver leaf on silk fabric, a technique called echo printing on silk. Again, a commercial, probably, I suppose it could be a residential application as well. The picture makes it look like that lamp might be in a home environment. But another example of fiber-based art. This one's called Compress 2, made out of linen by a woman named Sheila Hicks. You can decide if you like or dislike this. It looks like one might need to feed this beast or clean up after it, or it might reproduce on its own. Not one that I'm very, very fond of, but an interesting piece of fiber-based art that somebody has created. This one I like a little bit more. It's a suspended sculpture of silk woven panels created by Chiaki Maki. Beautiful silk, kind of a sheer dupioni silk draped against a wall and hanging from a ceiling. Kind of an interesting application that you may or may not like. Here we have some antique Chinese vests that are mounted under plexiglass and placed on this wall. I think they're absolutely beautiful. I probably would have toned down the rest of the room a little bit so that these Chinese vests would have been a little bit more the star of the show. They almost disappear in this busy, busy room, but I think that's a beautiful example of fiber-based art on this particular wall. This screen shows kind of a nautical rope sculpture that you may or may not like. It's actually one that I made. I copied from one that I saw in Architectural Digest in our beach house in Newport Beach. It seemed like a good place to put kind of a nautical rope sculpture, as the house is certainly in a nautical environment. And you can decide whether or not you like that one as well. All right, we're going to finish this morning's lecture by talking about panel systems. And those are those freestanding movable walls that you see in office buildings. They connect to desks and other integrated office furniture. They can be disassembled and moved around, creating different sizes of cubbies and office spaces. They were originally conceived to be exactly 5 feet wide, and fabric was specifically woven for them in widths that were 66 to 69 inches wide, so that you would have 5 feet of fabric plus enough to wrap around the panel. So in general, when you're purchasing panel systems for an office, the manufacturers are going to recommend that you use their fabrics because they are just the right size to wrap around those various panels. But you could certainly customize that as well. So here you see some of those 5-foot panels on the left. They attach to the all this modular furniture and can be taken apart. And but generally, the manufacturer, as I mentioned before, does provide you with fabric samples that are kind of tried and true that they have tested to go on these panel systems. There's not too much more we need to say about panel systems today. You'll run across those. I don't know, with COVID the last couple of years, we have found that less and less people are actually working in office buildings. More people are working from home and trying to figure out how they can carve out an office space in their home, and might do that with some sort of a panel system environment in your home too, to create kind of an office space in a corner of a larger room. So I think you're still going to see these in office spaces, just perhaps they're not as popular right now as less people are working in offices. But just remember that in terms of fabric applications, you're generally going to choose fabric that choose from a variety of fabric that the manufacturer has already kind of predetermined will work on those panel systems. Okay, so that's the end of today's lecture. No assignments for next week unless your syllabus says that you're to watch the video for next week on the textile industry. In some classes that was assigned last week, in some classes it's an assignment for this week. So if you haven't watched the video on the textile industry, go ahead and watch that and check the due date for this particular class to see if that was due last week, or if it's due, or to see if that was due today, or if it's due a week from now. You can go ahead and look ahead to the final project, but we're going to talk about it more specifically in class next week. It won't be due until 2 weeks from today. And then you will be presenting those. I'm not quite sure how we're going to do that in this pre-recorded lecture series. I don't think you'll be able to present those orally. You'll just be presenting those by uploading your assignment onto Dashboard. But we'll talk more about that next week, that final project. But you can go ahead and look ahead and start thinking about that. Their syllabus might still say that that's a group project or that you work on it with another system, but that's not. It is an individual project that you will be doing by yourself, creating in a small environment to satisfy specific requests of 4 different pretend clients. So go ahead and look at that a little bit if you want, but we'll talk about it more in class next week. So have a nice week, and I'll look forward to seeing you in our next class, which will be on the textile industry. That will be our final lecture before having 1 or 2 weeks for the final presentations. Bye-bye.